These guys represent our oldest customer, our largest customer, and one of our newest customers. I'll start with Hugh Lander with Remy Cointreau USA, which has been our longest running customer, maybe 6.5 years. And Scott Ades, who's with Dalla Terra, really unique wine model, direct to distributor from vineyards in Italy. Last but not least, Jay Finnigan with RNDC, which is, of course, our largest customer. We have about 5,600 users on GreatVines in RNDC across all their markets and rolling out aggressively and quickly and really full adoption of the tool. So we are really honored to have the three of you here to talk about distributor and supplier collaboration. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to jump right in. I included this quote, and for me, I underlined the key word is evolve, right? This industry needs to continue to think about doing things in a new way. In preparing for all this, I reminded the team yesterday of that great Henry Ford line when he said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? So see our role as kind of bringing new ideas and new thoughts to you, and that's part of what this is about today, is to really get outside of our day-to-day, the way we've been operating for a long time, and think about new ways to do things. And so with that, I'm going to jump into the 5 broad topics we're going to talk about. Priorities and objectives. How do we get these teams aligned, thinking about marching down the road in the same fashion, right, in the same pace, managing each other's expectations and aligning your goals, developing a common language, really critical, something that we feel we do a good job, but everyone can sort of improve about speaking the same language. You'll hear some specific examples about that. Training, turnover. We know that there's a lot of turnover in this industry, and how do we carry on the message of usability and consistency? And then accountability, kind of the magic word in the industry, particularly when we're talking 3-tier, right? So we'll dive in with the first one, and I've left these questions on the screen, but by no means are we going to strictly stick to these. But I want to open it up by asking Hugh. So from your role on the supplier side, what do you think is the most effective way for suppliers to be communicating their sales drivers and their brand KPIs with their distributors?
417 slide PowerPoint decks, right?
Perfect.
That's the industry standard, but and I think the real answer to that is who you're talking to at the distributor. You're going to have those big QBRs, those monthly business reviews that are typically death by PowerPoint, but a lot of times it's a game of telephone by the time those standards and KPIs make it down to the DM level, to the supervisor, let alone the rep level. Things look completely different. So there's absolutely some upside or opportunity to try to tighten that line of communication, so what we talk about in a meeting with a division VP doesn't look completely different by the time it gets down.
Right.
And it's not, whatever the solution is, it's not PowerPoint.
Right. PowerPoint and Excel, yeah.
Yeah.
And so let me turn to Jay and say, once your team is aligned on those, assuming it all goes well and everyone understands what the suppliers are expecting, how do you then as distributor use technology to deliver back the results of what you're doing to execute against those KPIs?
Sure. Well, I think first and foremost for us, what we've been successful doing is exposing the transparency. So as we sit down and talk about the objectives, we then use a segmentation model to then decide which objectives go where and which brands go where and what are the best places to be successful for not only the supplier but for our customers as well. Through that transparency of, okay, we both agree to these objectives, then it's a matter of they need to be able to see the results daily just like us, especially when you get into chain management. And if you're doing a special program against chain stores, the way the industry has always been is you get a program with a chain, you hope it works. Sometimes there's a third party that comes out and inspects it, and you get a report after the program or even 2-3 months after the program. Now, chain managers and suppliers both, as well as CAMs in our industry, in our business, can go in and see daily results. People are going into those accounts every day and using the tool, and the results are reported. So the transparency is how we're using the technology. The technology is its tool. If we're getting usage, then we're going to have data. The better way of getting results is sharing that data as transparent as possible.
And be able to see it on a daily basis, not just your sales, but the activities. So Scott, what are your thoughts as you're now in the role of a smaller supplier? how do you stand out in a crowd? I know we talked about, these broad books of business and big portfolios. How do you stand out and make sure that your brand's needs are being met?
Yeah, I think the number one way we try to do that is to be easy to do business with and deliver whatever the salesperson ultimately needs to get the job done. And you talked about how, when you create an objective up here in some management meeting, but that objective really needs to be executed by a salesperson on the street. And the likelihood of the objective created here getting down to the person here is pretty small.
Yeah.
And the more complicated that objective is, or the more difficult it is to execute, the less likely it's to get down and the less likely it is to be executed. So we like to keep it really, really simple, as simple as possible. And when you think about KPIs and things like that, when I was on the distribution side, what I would say to suppliers is, I'm going to try and get your product in as many accounts as possible. Let's not talk about cases. Let's talk about being in accounts. And so now, when I'm on the other side, my response to them is, let's talk about getting my products in as many accounts as possible, because that's really what we need to get done. And that's a pretty simple, easy to understand objective for everybody from top to bottom. So keeping it simple and being really easy to deal with in that communication.
And you'll hear Ben Salisbury up next with Rob McDonald talking about it's not just getting it in the most accounts, but in the right accounts. Yeah. And he'll be talking about his methodology for that.
I think building on that, you talk about using technology against that. So our industry, tends to work on pods and volume. Brick and mortar is not getting any bigger. So it's what you're doing to attack the customer and where you're going to see your brands. So what this technology allows us to do is do the extra that's not in a sales report or not in a points of distribution report. Are we writing KPIs to help build the brand? Is the price right? Is it in the right place? Is it to the left of your parent brand or to the right of your parent brand or adjacent to a competitive brand? Are you using the right point of sale? Is the thematic point of sale to date? I mean, these are all things that you would think are common sense to the average salesperson, but from a distributor side, you could be talking about as many as 2,400 SKUs or 24,000 SKUs that they're trying to manage in the same account. So by using this technology to be standardized and show exactly what the suppliers are looking for beyond sales and distribution, they're looking at actual, brand building activities. This has really helped our business.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about goals. And so look out into the future as opposed to where we are today. In each of your organizations, what are you thinking about in terms of managing your partners' goals, what you're expecting of them, in terms of how they're engaging at the account level, right? We believe in this phrase, the distributors help those that help themselves, right? So you want to be in the market, you want to be executing and helping your brands, but you can't be at every account, right? You count on your distributors to do that. So talk a little bit about what you see into the future, what's in your crystal ball for how you can be executing a more precise, right, across the multiple organizations.
I think it is. I think it is transparency. I think it is certainly agreeing. Honestly, this is where the tool has almost reverse psychology helped us with our suppliers. Okay, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about the objectives that you want us to hit. We're going to be held accountable. This tool, particularly GreatVines, allows you to inspect what you expect, certainly an industry phrase, right? So we do that. And whether it be 5 KPIs or 10 KPIs or a survey of 20 questions, we're being held to that core set of objectives. It's outlined very clearly. What gets us, though, is when you do that, you walk into a store that's got 100%, and a supplier then says, yeah, but what about our lettuce-flavored vodka that you haven't touched over here? Wait a minute, lettuce-flavored vodka wasn't in the first 20 objectives. Right. So are we being held accountable for the right things? Those conversations have been a lot more constructive, and honestly, things like the lettuce-flavored vodka have come up because we're executing at a higher level.
Yeah. Remove some of the vagueness of direction from so many different companies.
Yeah.
And I think I know we talked on our prep calls about this, but as suppliers continue to put more people in the trade themselves, who are often in some cases duplicating the roles of distributor personnel. If we're all working off the same sheet of music, generally the same KPIs and the execution standards, so whether somebody from RNDC surveys the account or somebody from Remy surveys the account, eventually all that data is going to flow into the same pool and we'll all be able to access it. So the speed of visibility, I mean, when I think about where Remy was before GreatVines, where the key account managers were filling out a paper form and then faxing it to the New York office on Friday afternoons for Janet to collate it by hand. It was,
Sure.
there was real time was a pipe dream, and we've closed that loop so much. It's astounding to think what it could look like in another couple years.
And I would say, again, maybe speaking on behalf of our methodology, it's not duplicative roles, right? They're very complementary. And the key is in figuring out how you complement each other, and the sum of the parts is greater than the, you know what I'm saying, with your supplier and distributor reps. So, Scott, anything to add?
A core thing to remember is that goals aren't effective unless people actually try to achieve them. And so if you have too many of them or they're not achievable, they can actually be worse than not having a goal, because then people don't go after them. And I view goals as kind of a roadmap for the salesperson to make more money. And if they view it that way, they're more likely to engage in the goals and more likely to engage in using the system that's going to help them track the goals, which creates more transparency, which lets everyone be more successful. So a little bit still on the theme of keep it simple, stupid, but also keep it in a format that engages the ultimate person who needs to execute it at the bottom of the chain.
That's a great point. We started out with kind of the mantra of continuous improvement. And if every quarter or every month you're changing your objectives, how much did you do for those brands prior? And if we're off to the next thing, what are we neglecting? To be able to say there's some consistency and some simplicity in it, it definitely drives success too.
All right.
Yeah, perfect. So let's talk about a common language. This is something that I think people really struggle with, right? When you're identifying what's a fine dining account, what's a white tablecloth account, which brands are right for the right accounts. And the distributors have so many suppliers talking these different languages. How do you guys think of technology solving that problem or trying to?
By the way, we don't call it fine dining anymore.
Right.
It's beautiful people hanging out in expensive places, drinking. No,
I love that.
but only if
You can fit that name into our segment field. So
well, there's an acronym. I'm sure it's coming.
It's a BPHDCQR.
Right. Love it.
I just made that up. That's
I mean, look, Scott's got the mantra of the day, which is keep it simple. I understand the value that suppliers and marketing teams place in customer-driven segmentation, need scope. There's a lot of great thought there, but again, that's one of those concepts that looks great in a boardroom, but by the time you communicate it down to the field level, it's sort of lost any meaning whatsoever. And I think as more and more suppliers invest and want to come up with their own language, it'll be more important than ever for RNDC and other distributor partners to kind of push back and say, look, your SDF, whatever is theirs, and we've got to just have that one language. If we allow it to keep separating and migrating its own way, it's going to become uncontrollable fairly soon.
Yeah, the business analysts want to keep slicing and dicing it, right, to be more strategic, and which makes your job a nightmare.
Well, I think the common language definitely comes down to segmentation. So as we talk about accounts, and that was a great example in the fine dining, we talk about accounts, we have to have a consistent language. RNDC has adopted a segmentation of not value accounts, but where our best opportunity accounts are. And so we look at a 5 criteria that play into basically an alpha, beta, gamma scale. Mm-hmm. What the supplier then does is come and brings us, and I'll give you a real world example. A supplier brought us a Scotch recently and said that it was new to the market, but they didn't want to target Scotch. They actually wanted to target American whiskey. They wanted to target bourbon. We were able to then take like brands within our portfolio and look at our alpha accounts and find which are indexing at least a little bit on Scotch, but are higher end whiskey accounts. And what was funny was as we were going through the target list of accounts, which ended up being about 80 accounts in one market. And we wound up going out and getting 105 in the first 90 days, which was a great result. But as we were looking at it, they were going through the accounts and go, well, that's not a good Scotch account. I said, wait a minute, the direction was target American whiskey. So we have to, one, make sure our objectives is clear, and then two, we're going to fish in the alpha accounts. We're going to fish where the fish are biting.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to the point Jay made earlier about segmentation, I mean, I think that's where the technology really allows you to segment. And in our business, in the fine wine business, you really have to segment because you're looking at niches in niches. And if you don't have the ability to segment and say, we need to work in this geography, we need to work in this type of account, to some extent, we need to work with these type of salespeople. And you're not gonna be able to code all of those things. And probably the more you code, the worse off you're gonna be. But if you have some ABC kind of levels, and again, keeping it as simple as possible, that really helps you figure out where to target. And all we do all day long, I think, is target. It's all target practice.
Absolutely. Because we've mentioned the keep it simple model, I'm going to step back to the last slide. We really have another part of our mantra, and I think this really comes from Tim. We try to get people to stop thinking about volume and cases and think about execution. So as that trickles down from supplier KPIs in the form of execution and objectives, are we making it simpler for the distributors? And I know that it's adding value that didn't exist before because it's putting these KPIs are really telling the distributor rep every day what they need to think about and focus on. But is it making it harder for them to do their jobs?
No, it's absolutely not. One, we've taken pen and paper away from them, which a lot of people still want to hang on to that. Mm-hmm. I'm one of them. I'm also not a millennial, in case anybody was asking. So I'm struggling to get into that mode. But now you've created more than just a survey tool. You've created an account management tool where you're managing everything. You're managing what you did in that account that day. You're managing your events, anything that you're planning, your follow-up notes, and then you've compiled that so it's a click, and you've got an email back to your manager on what you did. You've got a full execution plan for that account. You've got a daily diary on what you did that account. We've given them back the gift of time.
Right.
We've made it a lot easier for them. We've made it more successful. At the same time, we've given them clear direction. Do what's on the page. Do this. Remy's asked for this. Do this.
Right.
Make sure you at least get this done. Their time is better spent in the account. They're more efficient, and we've given them part of their day back on the front end and the back end where they do pre-planning and post-planning that they can go and do more time selling, more time in relationship.
Right. Would you? Go ahead.
Well, and RNDC has been a great partner for us, and as we last year first started, I won't say pushing down, but flowing through our KPIs down to be programmed in the local RNDC markets, there was great pushback that, hey, Remy, you're creating these KPI questions with like 4 conditions, if, and the feedback was plain and simple.
Yeah.
It's not the way we want it, right? That it needs one question, yes or no. So they forced us in a very good way to slow down a little bit and let's focus on the basics and the fundamentals and not try to create, this. I'm sure we all have it with our annual goals. You get one goal, but it's really 17 goals just written into one paragraph. And we were so guilty of that. And it made it really difficult for even our field people, let alone a distributor field person, to honestly look at that question on their iPad and figure out, I don't know how to answer that. That's so complicated. I can't quickly say yes or no. That's a huge error on our part. So it's been nice to clean that up.
Yeah. And so would you say anecdotally the shift to these simpler KPIs, the more real time, is helping grow the business and meeting those goals that you're looking to accomplish?
Absolutely.
Great. Wonderful. Okay, we'll jump back to the
I'll
fourth.
say on that as you flip slides, there's an art to writing a good KPI. It's not an objective, and you have to think like the rep in that account. What are they looking for? And with the tool and technology, you can take a very complex objective and break it out to make it very simple, whether you're using drop downs, whether you're using text input, whether you're using yes or no, whether you're using multiple choice. the art of taking what's in that objective and translating it to make the tool efficient is an art, and it does take practice. It's not something you've built. I think my two teammates are great examples of that.
We could probably have a whole day conference on designing surveys.
Oh, yeah.
We'll do that next year. So let's talk about training, turnover. Maybe each of you can give some examples of ways that you have found to be most effective with your team. Not specifically GreatVines again, we're just thinking more broadly, how are you getting ROI on your investment in these salespeople, and how are you making sure they're doing the right things?
Yeah, I think the key to training isn't actually the training, but it's the engagement in the tool itself. Because if you train somebody and then they go off and don't use the tool, the training was completely wasted. So you really have to engage them in the process. It gets a little bit back to all the other topics of KPIs, and if it helps you get the job done. If it helps the salesperson or the person who's in the account get the job done, they'll engage and then they'll do the training. So the training has to be a combination of how do I do this and why do I want to do this? Because if they understand why they want to do it, then they'll engage in it going forward, and then the training will actually have some impact. And that kind of, I think Jay just said, this shows you what you need to do. And 10% of salespeople figure it out all by themselves, and they're the top performers, and you don't really need to train them at all. And 10% of salespeople, doesn't really matter what you train them, they're probably not going to get it anyway, and they're not going to be there that long. And then 80% are looking for direction on how to figure out what to do. So if the training shows them, here's what you do, and here's why you want to do it, you'll engage them and they'll move on. Obviously with degrees, but that's what I find. Make it so that they want to do it, or else the training doesn't have impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think answer one question: what's in it for me?
Yeah.
If you can answer that question up front, you've got them.
Right.
I think our early rollouts of GreatVine, we did a disservice because we spent too much time promoting all of the great things that GreatVines can do, and I called it early on the Swiss Army knife. And I said, if I wanted you to open boxes, I'd buy you a 99-cent box cutter. It does the same thing. This does a lot more than just open boxes. Look at all this great stuff. I never answered the question, nor did Aubrey or Aaron, of what's in it for me. The minute you start talking about saving that time on the front end, saving that time on the back end, being consistent, watching your sales grow because you're doing, what the suppliers ask for. More importantly, we overlaid an incentive program against those items. We moved away from the volume and the pod incentives and more on the sales execution incentives. And now there's a real need to use that system, because if I don't get paid.
Right.
So there is a little bit of, you talk about carrot and the stick, there is a little bit, just answer the question, what's in it for me?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thinking behind that question was, particularly in your case, you have so many users, what are you doing to identify, where people are falling off in usage? But as you say, if their pay and bonus is tied to it, that generally doesn't happen. But maybe from a supplier perspective, what are your thoughts in terms of monitoring how your teams use technology?
Yeah. I think one of the best examples of a good implementation of technology was 10 or 15 years ago. Most distributors went from, calling in orders on the phone to entering into a handheld, which saved people a lot of time, got their orders in quicker, and they made more money as a result of it. Mm-hmm. And those people engaged in that pretty much right away. There were people you had to beat a little bit because they didn't even know how to use a phone, but for the most part, people engaged in that. When you look at the technology today, it's really about, if they think they're going to make more money by using this, they'll stay engaged in it. If they think it's a waste of their time, they won't stay engaged in it. And that gets back to the simple questions that kind of point you where you want to go. The other thing I think is really important in training and keeping engagement is actually, and I'm sure Jay can talk about this at length, is having a training program. If you're rolling out to a lot of people, and I've rolled out training to hundreds of people, that process of rolling out the training needs to be really good. You can have great training materials, but if you have a crappy process for rolling it out, if the technology doesn't work, I remember rolling out a training, I won't go into detail, but I said, do we test everything? Yes, we tested everything. Well, we didn't test everything because we didn't test the router in the room where the training was happening. So everybody sat down and they couldn't log in because it was a brand new router and it just needed a switch
Right.
flicked. You know what I mean? So all of those things matter just as much as the actual materials in the training. And most people spend a lot of time thinking about the 50-page PowerPoint that's going to walk through everything you need to do and not really about the process of rolling out the training.
Yeah, you'll hear later when Kara and Greg talk about customer success, about the role of your administrators and your power users. And we very much believe in the train the trainer model. We'd rather come in and make sure that you have all the tools you need. Otherwise, we show up, give them all this knowledge, we disappear. You don't have anyone internally that they can really look to and turn to when they have questions. So.
And just on your engagement question, that I think is a really good point, the train the trainer, because usually the trainer who does the original training kind of understands your job but has never been in your job. And often the train the trainer person has done your job and they can really apply it much more directly. Big fan of that model.
I'll say absolutely. And I'll say that what worked for us in training, and we did adapt as we went along, is the support from GreatVines. Between Tim and Todd and the group, that they were at those training meetings. They were making sure that if there wasn't a little hiccup right away, it was fixed. That way we stayed positive and moved forward. Couldn't have done it without that support. It was
You have
it was
to
a
say this
handhold.
for the afternoon. This is the afternoon.
Yeah, they buy my lunch.
Yeah,
So I said, no. It really was more of a handhold than a handoff, and that was a big plus.
Yeah, it's a process, not an event, I have to say. Since we're talking about training, have any of you thought about or looked at kind of remote, online, even recorded trainings for brand education? I mean, for example, Scott, you have a unique story with the Vineyard Direct model, right? How do you explain that to distributors where there's constantly new reps?
There are some very good systems out there. I find them to be a lot of work and very expensive because it is a lot of work either way you do it. But we do a lot of our training remotely because the people are remote. But it ends up being a little bit more kind of video conference type training or video as opposed to, which I guess is still remote training, but not recorded remote training or
Right.
on-demand remote training. Yeah.
Great. So we'll talk about the last subject, which is consistency and accountability. So back to in-store execution. How do we use technology? I think we all know how we're using it today because most people in the room are using our technology to do it. But what do you see into the future? If you had any nuggets of where you'd like to see this go, how will technology further shape this industry?
I still think at the end of the day, you've got to physically inspect what you expect. And, you mentioned earlier just the pace of turnover, and it's on the distributor and on the supplier side. And there are some suppliers in our industry who are really adamant about managers being in the trade with their people, coaching, developing, and evaluating. And I don't want to think that the rest of the industry that we've gotten away from that, but there's a lot of other business aspects going on, and it seems like that really valuable activity has been devalued a little bit. And so I like to look at the online accountability that GreatVines offers as a way to supplement and reinforce what the manager should be seeing out there. I don't know if I'd ever be comfortable with it fully replacing it because there's the dreaded curbside chat in our industry that you can't replace. With even somebody walking around an account with her iPad camera on doing a pan, there's just some things that you've just got to be in there and get your hands on. I think the level of accountability that we have now is unsurpassed in my 27 years. The fact that I can instantly go in and see pictures of displays halfway across the country on any brand that I choose to look at is fantastic. But I still want there to be a human touch element along the way. So I think I agree that it'll never replace human touch engagement with the customer. It can certainly improve the engagement, right? Mm-hmm. More information, up-to-date information. Jay, talk a little bit about accountability because you mentioned transparency a few times, and we always hear distributors. Some will grumble about the reps don't want
the suppliers up in their business, knowing exactly how many accounts they're going to every day and all of this. I mean, how is that changing in your role?
Well, candidly, in the distributor role, the distributor aspect, the game has changed, and a huge consolidation within our company, within our industry rather, of two companies that made a large footprint. And one thing we've heard is there is a lack of transparency out of that. So we feel the transparency is actually a selling point for us. It is a partnership. It's not a black box distributor. We want to know where we can be better and help us. We all win. If one wins, we all win. So we want that transparency, and we promote that. I think the alliance in what we did early on with GreatVines with Remy was a great example of where transparency works. You were able to see progression and see continuous improvement and be able to stoke that when you saw a dip or when you saw a rep that was behind. The transparency helped the reps. And when we talk about, well, what's in it for me, the transparency really helped the reps in terms of we've got a list of sales reps that moved up to managers because their performance was so transparent and they were knocking it out of the park, not just on their sales numbers, but on their execution, their relationship, their organization, their follow-up. They were talent, they were top talent, so they were moved up. So it really did help broker that.
Oh, that's awesome. Other thoughts?
Just from the marketing side, I was in New York last week for our marketing meetings, and it was a big topic of discussion that this visibility is very important to them as well because it helps focus investment instead of throwing bad money or good money after bad. We can now through our overall data management take a look at how certain activities lead to volume and help influence what programs we invest in or retract on, whatever. And so all that visibility is feeding back up the loop as well, which is just going to make us more effective. So,
would you say that as an organization, you're looking for more visibility than you have today?
I don't know if it's about more in a broader sense. It's probably more in a deeper sense that we'd like to look deeper into accounts as opposed to let's add more things that we want to track. Let's look closer at the things we're already tracking and make sure we fully understand those before we start plussing out.
I want to go back to one of your questions on the technology side and where we see that improving. I think there's two key areas that are next and we have to start looking at, and that is compliance and efficiency. So talk about compliance first, especially when you're talking about the chains. Let's pick a Walmart, for example. You've got a shelf schematic and every one of the suppliers in the room, as well as the distributors in the room, value every one of those slots that we're given. So we want to make sure we're compliant on that shelf set. I got to believe that technology is going to take us to a place where we can use the camera and get label recognition and be able to know instantly what's not compliant. I think that's going to be a huge tool for us, and especially a value back to our retailers and our key buyers back in, as the example goes, Bentonville, and say, here's where we're not compliant based on your store. The other one is efficiency. So we got to think about, we are moving from a Windows-based kind of thought to a much more streamlined one-stop shop. So GreatVines needs to become our hub in not only of our account management, but be able to have the ability to go into brand education portals so I can learn about that brand immediately before I do my sales pitch. Go in and extract sales information, it has to be that one conduit. It can't just be one thing. I talk about it being the Swiss Army knife. There's tons of things in the Swiss Army knife. We're not just using this tool to survey. We're doing a lot of other things with it, but I think that's got to evolve. And the more things that the salesman can be efficient on and not have to go to several different apps or several different windows, but it's one resource, that's really going to be the game changer. That's the evolution.
Did you hear that, Aaron? We have to build the image recognition. Add that? Okay, add that to the list. Great. I want to open it up to questions, but real quick, as I was preparing for this, I was reminded of a blog that Tim recently wrote, and just wanted to quickly plug the articles that we produce. Tim and the other members on our team we produce a lot of information every month, a number of different articles, and this is something Tim had put together recently about distributor relationships and suppliers upping their game. And so I kind of summarized, I thought, were some of the key points. Having a well-defined target market and a strategy that's consistent, right? We talked about consistency. Focusing on the most effective drivers, and I think that's back to this concept of simplicity, right? Don't have this and this or this and this, and right? Keep it simple, keep it consistent, and don't dilute your efforts with poor performing execution, right? It's just you're throwing good money after bad, and suppliers have to have resources in the field, right? Back to the distributors helping those that help themselves, be in the market. Helping the distributor rep, again, it's not replacing or competing, it's complementary, right? So with that, I'd like to open it up to some questions.
So from what I get from this conversation then, you're both on GreatVines, and do you as a supplier have visibility to what his people are doing as your distributor through GreatVines?
No, the reporting relationship is still whatever we ask for and RNDC provides us. So if I'm in the Dallas market and with a Remy manager in the Dallas market, there's no way for them to log into the RNDC interface and see account level data, what a DM or rep. There's still a firewall there.
Wouldn't that be exciting if it was that way?
It could be, yes. Exciting might be the word that...
Exactly.
I'm only with RNDC in one state, so push that too hard.
No, I think it would, and I think we welcome that. Again, having more eyes in an account is a good thing, and we all agree to that. There's just hurdles to overcome, and certainly in suppliers sharing each other's data or seeing each other's data. GreatVines, I know, has partnered with Good Data in the past as kind of that data depository. We use a data warehouse called MicroStrategy. Every supplier of ours has access to MicroStrategy, so all the reporting that's done, and they can do ad hoc reports on all their sales and distribution. Well, we've just made it simple, trying to streamline it rather than using Good Data. We've taken all the data from GreatVines and compiled it into MicroStrategy, which all the suppliers have access to. So, and we're continuing to evolve that and hoping to get some streamlined so that it's not just state or region-based. Corporate suppliers can go in and see the landscape of all RNDC and what their brands are doing. So that's some of the issues that we've got to overcome moving forward. But yeah, the transparency of seeing whether it be the account level or a full gamut is what we're striving for.
And let me just build on that. I mean, my people are calling on the same accounts that Jay's people are calling on, and it would make sense at some point to know that somebody from either side went in and just dropped $500 in that account on a dinner or something like that, so we could leverage that investment for additional placements, whatever that might be. And so I think there definitely are things that we should both be able to look at in each other's universes. Total transparency might be a little ways off, but to avoid duplicating of efforts and double spending, there's definitely some opportunity there in the short term.
Because that's a great point. We have to get over this distributor-supplier relationship mentality of gotcha. Oh, you didn't do something in the account, so I'm going to whack you. That's not how we operate. Certainly not with Remy. It's not how we operate. So the idea of one of a supplier rep going in and making a call and getting a placement, well, they can't actually sell or deliver. So they've got to make a contact point. So if they can go in and do that through GreatVines and say, Jay, we were just in Bob's Steakhouse and we put this new, we just sold a bottle of Louis. Man, we're all over that. That's helping us out. That's a true partnership. So got to get out of that gotcha mentality and get into, how we're working together.
But you can't currently do that through GreatVines.
Can't do that right now, no.
I think that's a really good, you were talking about collaboration and using technology. That, I think, is one of the things that suppliers really want to know and distributors really want to know is, when did you go into that account? When did you do something? Because usually sometimes they're working together, but very often they're separate. And exactly, we just spent $500, or we just got a placement, or the supplier got the placement and the salesperson doesn't even know. It'd be great if there were fields that could be shared between that were those type of specific items when they're going in.
My question is really around, are you putting in this system in GreatVines, all your suppliers and supplier contacts? Do you have us located as contacts or companies?
To be honest with you, never thought of it, but you're right. If if a lot of the suppliers have a specialist in the market, or a master distiller or taster. It would be, especially if you're talking in Kentucky, where there's all the distilleries, or here, the wineries. So to be able to pull up somebody and say, hey, I've got an account on the hook, would love for somebody to come in and help make a call. That's a great asset. That's a great tool.
Anyone else? Other questions?
Can you provide any insight into the time it takes for adoption for a new user, and maybe any stages they might go through, successful or unsuccessful, in learning to use GreatVines and becoming strong with it in the market?
Sure. In fact, numbers are fairly fresh because I just presented to our executive leadership team yesterday on a similar topic. Usage has always been, we're paying for this technology, who's using it? So it's always been on the forefront anytime I speak to the executive team. In July, our usage rates were 54%. They were extremely low. We obviously want 100%, but we put a 3-month target to see if we could get to at least 85%. I was happy to report yesterday we're at 94% on average usage, so it was very, very good. The adoption rate, what we're finding, is in stages, and allow me to go a little bit here. So your early adopters are going to do it, and we see those guys skyrocket. The main group needs a higher influence, and what we found is the higher influence comes from the management. We can all do a corporate mandate and say you need to use this, but if the manager hasn't adopted it and is saying, don't worry about that right now, I need you to go do this, adoption goes down. What we were tracking in terms of this bottom tier, the sales reps, the actual users, and seeing, the early adopters are using it, and we're at 40, 50% with a steady little incline. What is driving this other part? We learned that leadership didn't adopt it. They're not the users. They're more or less the report readers. They're not the users. So that was a big swing. You could say floggings will continue till morale improves kind of mentality a little bit. But you start getting the leadership full buy-in, and again, it goes back to the question, what's in it for me? We never sold the managers on the value of it. And the minute they start getting that data, oh my God, then it's pushing down, why aren't you using GreatVines? So I would say from our scale, our training was very good. We did have videos on our Cornerstone and RNDC University that they could go online and reference, or for new employees. I think that Ride With's helped. Certainly it was a hand hold, not a handoff. Reinforcing, when we look at usage reports where usage is really down and we can track all the way down to a manager, we pinpoint that manager and we have a team go in and train with them. Aubrey's done a great job at that as well. We go in and look at a market and say, okay, these 2 managers haven't been adopted. Don't work with the reps, work with the manager, and then go work with the reps, and you see that up. I would say good usage, to simplify the answer, I would say it's a 6-month process, but in reality, it's closer to a year.
I'm wondering if, Jay, if you can talk about how you are able to maybe provide some visibility for suppliers, not only to see how their own brands are performing, but how they perform around other, in reference to that category that you're selling. So if I want to know how my shard is doing, not just what I'm doing, but what our other shards in my same price segment are doing, not to give away or divulge proprietary information, but just to say, this is what's happening here, and you're performing like this. Are you able to do this with this technology? Do you provide that sort of insight? And
we are, and we do. I think there's a couple things in there, and I'll use the example I referenced earlier with the Scotch that wanted to go after American whiskey. I mean, we took 3 like brands based on like price points to create our target list. So that was basically targeting the list. We can then easily go in and see what those brands are asking for, what are the objectives within GreatVines for those brands, and see comparable to what this new Scotch was asking for and compare. I think that to the heart of that question is, are we putting resources against analysts to dig out those nuggets? And we've just recently invested in a whole new organization of analysts against portfolio management, this being the key part of it. GreatVines was a catalyst in that, was we have all this great data, but that tree falls in the forest, nobody's around, doesn't make a noise. You got to get in and mine out that data. And sometimes it is based on a question, like, or a task, go out and get me American whiskey, or is it a Chardonnay, where we buy the glass, where, you know, who's on buy the glass, all of that stuff that can be tracked, we can, we can reference. The other aspect is we do a lot of surveys that have nothing to do with the suppliers. We do shelving surveys, we do back bar surveys, we do buy the glass menu surveys, we do pricing surveys. So all of that is at the disposal of the suppliers in terms of, those are generic reports. So I want to see a pricing report, or I want to see a buy the glass report, and it's all done by account. So there is some transparency that way. It is just who's the resource to be the analyst to dig in and mine that data.
Do your modules, do you do questions and analytics around whether the employees are getting the answers correct or not? Or is it all decks with information that can be downloaded and shared? What's the common practice, I guess, for RNDC or with Remy?
Well, for Remy, for the online training, there is a certification quiz, we call it, for each of the brand education modules. So it's a 15-question multiple choice test. So you, in essence, download the study guide to learn about the brand, to be able to go in and pass the test. And then we also have some online tablet-based learning that gets pushed down from Global, and everything that comes down there has an associated quiz as well. So I'm a firm believer in quizzes to drive retention.
And that goes to the distributor partners then?
So for the distributor partners, at least for what I share with RNDC, I have shared the study guides, and then I've given them the quizzes, and they have their own mechanics to be able to add those in. And so RNDC is using them. I think for us, Breakthrough is as well. But that's as far as it goes. So.
We do. We use our RNDC University. It's a cornerstone platform. Every module that we do get from the supplier. If there's not one available, typically we will build one. We have a core group, a training group within RNDC that will do that. Everything does have to have a test, and it has to have a passing grade. And they have a X amount of time to complete it, or they don't get commission. So it's pretty strict.
Well, great. Oh, one final
Just
thought?
in my prior role, we used that training also and those quizzes to allow people to get certifications. So you could be certified in blank, in whatever category it was, certain type of spirits or wine, and you could actually earn more money if you got more certifications. And that engaged a lot of people in getting educated. So.
Wonderful. Well, I think it was Hugh that said if this were a traditional distributor meeting, it would start 15 minutes late and run an hour long. So I think we're doing good by those standards. So thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Appreciate it.